Okay, so good evening and good morning to everyone joining us from different time zones in North America and China. I'm Patty Li, Director of the Confucius Institute at Webster University. Welcome to the China Urban Study Author Talk series. This is our fourth author talk in the spring semester. And this talk series aims at creating a new platform for international scholarly exchange in this virtual world and bring to scholars and the general public the newly explored aspects and cutting edge methods in the field of China urban studies. Today, we are honored to have Professor Yomi Braester joining us from Seattle. He will speak about his book, Painting the City Ride, Chinese Cinema and the Urban Contract. And I know many of you here know or heard about Dr. Braester before. He has a very successful scholarly career with a long list of remarkable achievements. So here I will just give a few highlights. Dr. Braester is the Baron and Alice Lockwood Professor in the Humanities, Professor of Cinema and Media Studies at the University of Washington in Seattle, as well as distinguished visiting professors at the Beijing Film Academy. He is the co-editor of Journal of Chinese Cinemas. He has published extensively on modern Chinese literature, film, and visual culture. Among his books are Witness Against the History, Literature, Film, Public Discourse in the 20th Century China, published in 2003, and Painting the City Ride, Chinese Cinema and Urban Contract, published in 2010. And this book has won the Joseph Levinson Book Prize. And among his current book project are A History of Xenophilia in the PRC, which is supported by a Guggenheim Fellowship, and investigation into new media and urban space in the PRC since 2008, and a book on Zhang Yimou. So welcome, Dr. Braester. And today's talk will be moderated by Dr. Wang Yu. Dr. Wang received his PhD in history from University of Toronto and is currently a postdoctor at a fellow at the University of Macau. He is interested in cities, history of technology, and the sonic culture in the 20th century China. He is currently working on a book manuscript about radio and the making of political culture in Mao's China. And Dr. Wang is also one of the founding members of this author talk series. Welcome, Dr. Wang, from behind the stage. Now come to the stage to see us today. And before I invite our two great historians to start the talk, I'd like to extend my thanks to my colleagues at Webster University for your strong support, and also to Professor Kang Ling from Fudan University, who is also a founding member of this author talk series, for sharing his broad scholarly connections. And okay, now let's welcome Dr. Wang and Professor Braester to start the conversation.
All right, thanks, Li Laoshi, for the introduction. I want to, yes, this is the fourth event of this Talk to Author series. The previous three has already been made available on YouTube. So if you guys are interested, you can search Talk to the Author and you'll find it on YouTube. And for today's session, it will also be put online. So I am very excited to talk to Professor Braester. Also, I want to thank Webster University for organizing and providing this platform, which is important to think about the pandemic, that not being able to meet face to face, but we do have, with the help support from Webster University, we can listen to the most important scholars talking about city and the reflection on the past as well as their envision on the city and urban studies in China in the future. Yumi, this book, this Painting the City Red, um, um, very, very important book, as we were saying earlier, that anyone in film studies, in urban studies, should find it a necessity to read. But for general audience, they still have a lot of things like, curious about how you come up with this book. So can you tell us something about this?
Yeah, so before I before I answer your question, let me also really thank Shuping and Wang Yu for what they did here, and Kangning. This is one of a number of talks that I've been giving in the last year, and it's very strange to give talks on Zoom, and there are so many ways to put together a talk, and I've been really very impressed and very grateful to Li Shuping and to Wang Yu for this. First of all, um, for all the preparation they did, which you don't see any. I mean, like, you who are participating right now, you don't see what happens behind the scenes, but a lot has happened, and they've done a fantastic job. And I'm really happy to do this talk in this format where it's going to be mostly a conversation, right? So we talked about it earlier, and I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction to the book with a PowerPoint, but then I'm going to try to keep it to about 10 minutes, and then we can really go into a free-floating conversation. It's also important for me to say, and that's already part of the answer, that it's all very nice and flattering to hear, that the book won a prize and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's about two things. First of all, is it something that I found interesting for myself? And in fact, one of the people who were on the committee for the Levinson Prize at the time, when I got the prize, he said, "Do you remember about 10 years ago, we were talking at on some occasion, and I was asking you, oh, Yomi, what are you doing now?" And you said, oh, something about film and urban planning, and this guy said, oh, well, he said to himself, not to me. He was very polite about it, but he said, oh, well, that's not going to go too far, right? So it's really not as if I knew what I was getting into, nor do I think I deserve much praise for it, in the sense that so much of it is just serendipity, just finding things by mistake almost. The one thing that I will say is that it was a very enjoyable process of going from one mistake to the other, and I want to try to explain some of that. So let me share my screen. And I'm going to just talk a little bit, as I said, not much. Hopefully you can all see the screen.
Yes.
Okay, so all right. So one point of departure was when I was invited to this conference called the Urban Generation, and that was in 1999 or 2000. And I, from the very beginning, realized that something was wrong with my assumptions about what urban film was. I was getting very interested in films such as this one, No Regret About Youth, 青春无悔, from 92, which I'm not going to go through the plot right now, but it's a really fascinating film that puts together the really scars of the city. And you can see here, Chai, the idea of mass destruction of the urban urban texture, right? It's actually not just chai, but it's chai xiangnan 100米, right? It's like a huge swath. And it all connects to these two people here who go back with a psychological scar, post-traumatic experience. A lot is going on here. And I was getting interested in that. And then at the same time, I was realizing that the films that describe this phenomenon are starting to get very commercialized already in the late 1990s. Okay, so there was this, there were a number of other films such as 美丽新世界, Beautiful New World, 98, if I remember correctly, which is about Shanghai, and here we have the Longtang, and that environment too is changing. Speculation in real estate, a lot of things go on in this film. Urban subject matter became very important. So this is just after Keep Cool came out, right? 有话好好说. That kind of buzz about urban matter, urban subject matter, and of course not just in film. So different artists were connecting their work to what was going on in the cities. Again, I don't have the time, at least for now, but if I'll gladly talk more about it later. But Zhang Dali, if you know his work, or the work of Wang Jinsong, all these are important for understanding what was in the air at the time in the late 1990s when I started thinking about the subject. And that's when I started arguing for the documentary impulse. That is, it was important for me, and this is part of what I hope we can also talk about today. It's not just about what is going on in the cities, but what is the role of media, and specifically of film, in all of this, right? I'm not trying to just talk about the city, but how the city is mediated. And so specifically, when I talked about the documentary impulse in my first essay that eventually grew into this book, I talked about how demolition foregrounds the role of filmmaking in documenting the present. Okay, so that was one thing, and indeed, perhaps one of the moments that really put it for me in perspective was the ending of 洗澡, shower, where the residents of the city or of this specific area that's being demolished to go on a tricycle, and as you can see, one of them is holding a one of these old people, right? These Lautor. This is not a filmmaker, but he's holding a video camera and he's documenting what's going on. And that was important for me to think about. And then later on, this is already into my research, but came, for example, Barbarian Love, which I assume many of you have not seen. So I'm going to just show you the very first half minute of the film, just because it's fascinating. And so here it goes. If your volume is high up, you may want to lower it down a little bit because it's a rather loud clip. Okay, so that's what's on the cover of my book, Painting the City Red, right? I'm not going to go into a whole description of it right now, but you can see what's going on here, right? I mean, there's a sense that things are happening very fast, are out of control. There is a sense that demolition and relocation and psychological scarring are all interrelated. So, okay, so there's that. Now let's look at another point in time, which is also another start for this entire project. I like when I'm in Beijing to go and watch theater, especially by Beijing Renyi, people's art theater, which is rather conservative, but it's always very well done, and has enormous production values, really interesting. So here's one theater piece called Goldfish Ponds, Jinyuchi, from 2001. So I just watched it because I wanted to watch what's going on at Renyi. I didn't think much beyond that. But then it was about this old neighborhood, and this neighborhood is being torn down. Eventually, it's being rebuilt, and toward the end, we see this woman, Jing Jing. Actually, let me make sure that we're getting the right thing. Okay, so Jing Jing, who now lives in the new complex and puts back goldfish into a little pond in this xiaoqu, in this new community that was built. And it's right next to Tiantan, to Altar of Heaven, and you can see the Altar of Heaven here in the background. Of course, this is just a stage set, right? Okay, so great, interesting. Jinyuchi, turns out that there is such a place, and this is where it is in Beijing. If you can see right on top of the Altar of Heaven, just north of it, this is the area called Jinyuchi. And so the day after I watched the stage play, I went to see it. And, you know, the stage play is all about this new development, right? So I'm going to see the new development, right? Well, wrong. What instead I could see was this demolition site, this huge demolition site. There was some construction in progress, and this dig that you see in front is going to end up as a pond. So that's as much as is true about it, but it's still in progress, right? So I realized that much of what the stage play is about is actually getting people to know about the project and how it's going to look in the future, and possibly also to make them less antsy about the demolition and relocation that's going on at the time. And indeed, there are those fences, right, to the construction site where you can see these architectural images showing what it's going to look like. I also talked to a friend of mine, Wang Jun, the author of a number of books, including this one, which is a fantastic book. It's also been translated into English, called Record of a City, I believe, in English. It's an award-winning book. It's really a fantastic book. And Wang Jun was saying, well, you know, do you understand what is going on with this entire? Because I talked to him about the Jinyuchi. I said, well, do you understand what's going on? This is the historical Longshugo region. Now, if you haven't read my book, and if you are not from China, you will not know what Longshugo is. If you are from China, you probably do, because it's one of the big propaganda pieces of the early PRC period. And so here is what Longshugo is. And even those of you who have read the first chapter in my book may understand a lot more after this hokey little thing that I'm going to show you here. Namely, this is old Beijing, right? This is what's inside the second ring road today in Beijing. And at the bottom, you see here the altar of heaven, and you see this this creek that doesn't exist anymore. You can see my cursor, right? Okay, so this creek, this is basically Longshugo, and the reason is, and the Jinyu is right here. These are the fish ponds that are connected to Dragon Whisker Creek. Why Dragon Whisker Creek? Because the idea is, let's remember what a dragon looks like. This is a dragon, and a dragon has whiskers, these yellow things, right? Now, this also has to do with geomancy in China. There, the idea that that there is a that the center of anything, of a mountain range or of a city, for that matter, is the veins of the dragon. And of course, in the imperial city, the dragon sits right here in the Forbidden City, in the imperial palace. And then there are these whiskers here, right? And these whiskers actually go right here, right? So this is Dragon Whisker Creek. This is why it's called the Dragon Whisker Creek. All right. So that's a more idealized map. This is what it actually looks like. And Dragon Whisker Creek was this area that was a very poor area, suffered from flooding and sewage for reasons that I will not go into right now. I talk about it in my book, and I'll gladly go back into it. And so, yeah, in the 1950s, it was both reconstructed, and there was a film. There was, well, this play by Lauscha, and also this film. And so I could understand now why they're so interested in Jinyu, in this, in goldfish ponds, right? This is what it looked like in the early 2000s. This is what it looked like actually as the play was going on, right? Here are more pictures. And the idea was, and in fact, so here's Jinyu, it actually did not succeed for a number of reasons. There was yet another stage play about the same region. This is becoming quite interesting, right? I mean, why are they so interested? Why are they putting on a show and they take it down and they put another show and so on and so forth? But now I'm starting to understand that there is a reason to tout this area. And just as it was touted in 1950, or 19, and then the film coming in 1952, something's going on. So, okay, let's go and figure out what happened then. And I decided to work like a historian and not like a film scholar, and went to the archives, to the municipal archives in Beijing, and got, for example, this internal memo. This is one of the really interesting memos that I found, but probably about 2/3 of the material that I was interested in, I could see that it's there in the catalog, but then it says it's for internal use only. So basically I couldn't see it. Now, mind you, we are talking here about sewage work. Sewage work in the 1950s. What is so secret about it? What is so sensitive about it that I can't read about it in the 21st century? Sewage work in the 1950s. So yeah, you could find all kinds of reasons. It has to do probably with a kind of demolition and relocation that was going on. I talk about it in the chapter. And so something similar is happening now in 2000, or now when I was starting to work on this, 2001. goldfish ponds. Oh, sorry. So here's again an interesting thing which made me crack up and also, perk up. Here's the ending of goldfish ponds, right? Which I showed you before. This is 2001. The place is not finished yet, right? We saw that. A year later, the project is finished. And what do they do to show you that it's done? What do they do as an opening ceremony? Well, politicos go to the little pond and put in goldfish, right? You can talk about it in terms of feng shui, some kind of karmic accounting, but you can also talk about it as returning to the glory of what this place used to have in the imperial period. And it goes on and on. There's an oversized sculpture of this young kid from the original play. And then kids go and give her goldfish. And here are other sculptures, street sculptures in the area, all kinds of stuff going on, some of it repurposed in funny ways, but okay. So now we have a new goldfish ponds. And here is where I have to explain, right? It's so much of it is fun because then I talk to people like Wang Jun, my friend, who alerts me to some issues. I go and talk to people in the area. Here, this lady here, she is one of the, she is the head of the neighborhood committee, which is a very particular thing to China, right? So these are the old ladies who take care of the neighborhood in some ways. And here she is showing me with great pride this new smart station. And here's this other guy who tells me about how he experiences the area in terms of his well, what it's like for him to be living in this area. You go around the neighborhood and you literally find on the floor these things. This is an adjacent compound that you realize that much of it really has to do with a lot of money, right? This is all about development, about how political leaders can market themselves, and also what's going to happen with all this very expensive real estate, right? This is in the middle of Beijing. So a lot of things go on here. And then I'll say one more thing, which is that then I realized I really need to talk to filmmakers. And I was a bit shy. I was very shy, in fact. And I decided I can't just go to filmmakers and tell them that I want to talk to them. So what I did instead is I put together a study abroad program in Beijing and started asking filmmakers to come and talk to my students. So I had this great alibi. It's turned out that I didn't need that alibi. Many filmmakers in China are very accessible, and they were really willing to talk. And I ended up talking to dozens of them. Here we have Ninging talking about her experience. And if you read the book, you'll see that I talked to Ninging for well, I still am in touch with her, but at the time I talked to her probably for 5 years. Each year she came and talked to my students, and this was a 2 to 3 hour deal. So I got a lot of information that way. And it was just fun, right? So it wasn't that I was just trudging through terribly boring material. This was just talking with Ninging, as you can see in this picture. She's like this all the time. And she went to school in Italy, so she spoke, because of the students, she was talking in English, but she speaks in English with a great Italian accent. It's fantastic, and with Italian, gestures, and she just goes all over the place. It's fantastic, right? It was just a marvelous experience. So I'll stop here, but this gives you a sense of what it was like just to get into the project, and how actually it was quite a pleasurable experience.
All right, thank you, Yumi. This is great. This is amazing to see how how the interaction between cities and urban planning has such a long-lasting effect on the development of China. We have quite a few questions, and some of them were very interesting in the Dragon Whisker Creed. I will put out one for now, which is, I think it also speaks to some of the key ideas in your presentation. And the question is from, um, the question is from uh, Worker Ferry. And Worker says, is the Dragon Whisker Creek still performed as a play today? And is film adaptation still enjoyed? Did Dragon Whisker Creek provide inspiration for Chinese plays and films that succeeded it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. Because the first answer, the on the surface kind of answer, is no, it's not performed. I even wonder how much the young generation of people growing up in China even know Dragon Whisker Creek. They definitely know about the author, the playwright Lao She. And Lao She is still touted as one of the major documenters, literary documenters of old Beijing. And especially through a play that became much more famous, namely Chaguar, Tea House, which I think first came out in 58 or 57. And so on the surface of it, Dragon Whisker Creek is only known probably to film and theater aficionados. And yet, at the same time, I would argue that the answer to the second part of Walker's question is, yes, it's extremely influential until today. I don't think a film such as Shower could have been made without some of the vocabulary, and I mean here in terms of plot, in terms of imagery, that's established already in Dragon Whisker Creek. And it goes all the way to the present. I can't think right now of a super recent film, but for example, Mr. Six, what is it called? The Par, or the film with Feng Xiaogang as in the main role.
Lao Pao or something
Lao
like
Par.
that. I don't.
Lao Par. Yeah, thank you. Which is about an old man who feels out of place and out of time. He lives in old Beijing. He is played, and that is important. He is played by a major film director who's also known for being an old-timer Beijing resident, right? Somebody who grew up in Beijing, who speaks with a strong Beijing accent and so on. So there is a clear sense that this is about old Beijing and how old Beijing is disappearing. And there is an attempt to keep and even restore some of the values of whatever this old Beijing is, even as the place itself is falling apart or being demolished or being taken over by people with a lot of money. If you know this, the plot of Mr. Six, then you know what I'm talking about, and if you don't, then go and watch Mr. Six. It's a really fun film, I think. But he gets into trouble with a young guy who's the son of an influential official and or merchant, right? He's basically what's called in Chinese Fuardai or Guanardai. And we see here how the idea on the one hand is, okay, so we get the imagery of the old alleys of Beijing. We see the plot of a society that's falling apart, or whose values are falling apart. And here's this old guy who's trying to find an heir for these values. And at the same time, it's a good way to make a film, right? It's the idea, and this is just as important, for reasons that are more or less sincere. The whole idea of using this imagery and this plot for a film made in the last decade still are valid, right? I mean, the same thing that, again, we have to go back all the way to Dragon Whisker Tree to understand.
Right. I definitely agree. This is also the one inspiration I got from the book, which is the Lodger's Dragon Whisker Creek provided basic vocabulary, right? Vocabulary for later generations to think about urban planning in Beijing. Um, I just wonder, as one of the audience also asking, did similar things happening in other cities as well? Like, the kind of long-lasting effect. And well, for instance, did Shanghai has a different set of vocabulary, to compare to Beijing, but equally has a long-lasting, profound impact?
Yeah, definitely so. So again, both are right. It's a different situation, and the vocabulary is somewhat different. But we're also finding some very important similarities. And some of them, frankly, I think are found in retrospect. That is, once we have the vocabulary, for example, of looking at old structures and using old images, whether it's postcards or old films or whatnot, to look at these images and dig out a genuine form. And I'm clearly making here, I'm putting quotation marks on genuine, but a genuine form of what things used to be like in the old city. We can go and do the same for Shanghai or for other cities. There are some interesting differences, for example, in that Shanghai doesn't have as long of a history, so that when there are historical allusions being made in the context of Beijing. It can go back to the Qing, to the Ming, to the Yuan. Usually not earlier than that, but that's already, a good 1,000 years of history. And in the case of Shanghai, usually the days of glory are located or are perceived to be somewhere in the 1920s and 30s. So as I just mentioned, 美丽新世界, a new, beautiful new world, was made in Shanghai, although the whole thing, the soundtrack is Pingtan from Suzhou. So there's some fudging again with the kind of what is the old city. But again, it makes sense to go to Pingtan because, say, when you're talking about Longshugo and Chaguar and Dragon Whisker Creek and Tea House, you're talking about the Beijing version of Qu of vernacular storytelling. So what's the Shanghai version? If we don't have one, we're going to steal one from Suzhou. And the interesting thing is that the vocabulary is just so similar, uncannily similar in some cases. I'm going to, I know that you were going to ask about Taipei, and if you don't mind, I want to show something
Yes,
about
I will.
Taipei. So actually, okay, so we can leave it for later, but I do want to show you
No,
something.
like I think this is great. I do want you, this is a nice transition. I do want you to bring Taipei in this context.
Okay, so you told me that you're wondering about the differences and how they all fit. Could you say a bit more?
I like you generally, when we think about painting the city red, right? The term itself, and then the let me be precise, Chinese cinema, right? These terms often invites people to think about China as mainland China, but you are definitely challenging this assumption, right? And I'm just curious, and I assume many people will be curious too, that would your readers think about why would you put Taipei in this red and Chinese context?
Yeah, so we're obviously getting into a very, very hairy topic, right? Because it has to do with politics, it has to do with different economic structure, different social structure. It also with the structure of academy in China, in Taiwan, in the United States, and the kind of statement that one makes by saying, okay, I'm going to talk about China. Oh, let me also talk about Taipei. And then, people ask like you, wait a moment, what's going on here? And one of the answers is, and by the way, this question has been asked and has been raised by some people who reviewed the book, and then there was a little debate over the pages of Journal of Asian Studies about this topic, specifically about why does Yomi add Taipei into the mix? Is that correct or not? And I'm not actually trying to make a point here, definitely not a political point, but I'm not even necessarily arguing that this is the same, that there is some kind of underlying Chinese culture or something like that that influences or that determines how urban planning and the mediation of urban planning are presented, are developed. I'm not arguing for that. I'm not even, frankly, very comfortable with the idea of the Sinophone, that is thinking of a cultural sphere that is defined by the use of Chinese dialects or languages, if only because I can see how very little I know once it comes to, first of all, even other cities in China, right? I mean, a whole book could be written, I'm absolutely sure, about Chongqing in terms of painting the city red or whatever you would like to call it. Painting the city brown, the color of Chongqing noodles or something, noodle sauce. But you know, okay, but I know that I can't do it because my research has not given me enough tools for dealing with that. Definitely not enough tools to deal with Hong Kong, which I'm very interested in, and I have tried to work on it, and again, interviewed a lot of people and so on, and I just felt it doesn't fit. How does Taipei fit? So in a very, I'm not being facetious in saying that I don't care how it fits. I mean it in the sense that here is a point of comparison, and whether you want to call it a point of comparison from within, kind of within a Chinese culture, or outside, and definitely it's outside the official culture, right? Outside the culture of urban planning that developed in the PRC. Urban planning is a culture, and you can really talk to planners and they will kind of tell you what their lineage is, who they go back to, in the same way that filmmakers or writers will tell you, you know, and you can see, okay, so I belong to this pie, to this school, or to that school. And it's often an international thing, and I'm going to say that to show that in a second when we're talking about Taipei. In fact, Taipei urban planning is umbilically connected to UC Berkeley. And I didn't say the US, I didn't say the West, I said UC Berkeley, okay? Very specific people and very specific books that are being used in the urban planning school and at UC Berkeley. Certain people who are, in fact, who started at UC Berkeley and moved to Taipei and so on and so forth. Something similar happens in Beijing, where you have people who are, say, Wu Liangyong's students, or the students of students now of Wu Liangyong, and that comes with a certain understanding of what it means to reconstruct or go into urban regeneration of one kind or another. But there are also some really fun connections, okay? And the connections, I find that they're helpful for me as a way of understanding what I'm into, both in terms of urban planning, and I'm going to give an example in a second, right? But let's see what we're actually talking about. We're talking about both what it means to plan a city or to plan the regeneration of a city, but also what it means to mediate that planning, right? So equally important for me is, what is the role of film? What is the role of the filmmakers? What is the role of images? What is the role of creating an audience around certain films that will put together for the audience a certain image and also create from that audience or through that audience a community interested in urban regeneration of a specific kind. Okay, so at this very abstract level, it's really important for me to see what's going on. And where I do think that there is an interesting connection that we can trace historically is the idea of governments who, or that patronize the arts and use the arts in specific ways, and also of a community of planners that are aware, or that is aware of what art can do, right? So in the United States, I think it's kind of, unless you're from Berkeley, it might be difficult, or unless you're from Berkeley urban planning, it might be difficult to understand the importance. I need to explain the importance of artists as part of urban activism. I don't think I have to explain as much, either in the PRC context or in the Taiwan context. Now, let me give you an example, again, from Painting the City Red, and see just how much it resonates with what I just talked about in the context of Longshugo, of Dragon Whisper Creek / Goldfish Ponds. So let me share the screen again. That's okay with you, right? Or am I going too long? Okay.
We have time.
Okay. Yeah, it's not just whether we have time, but also whether I am testing your patience with me just talking and talking and talking. So do stop me if you don't want me to. Okay, I'll go to that in a second. But here is how the project started for me when I was thinking about Taipei. So I watched this film. This was the first Tsai Ming-liang film that I ever watched, Vive l'amour, when it came out in '94. Tsai Ming-liang, you should try to watch it. You're going to either love Tsai Ming-liang films or hate them. Okay, they're slow. They have a very subtle kind of insider joke sort of humor, but for me, they're actually laugh out loud films. I love them for so many reasons. And then toward the end, this woman goes through this park, and it's not much of a park yet, right? It's a park in the process of becoming a park, very much like what happened in Longshugo, right? And again, this is very much the result of a political decision. It turned out, right? I mean, I won't go into the whole story, but of how I got to understand what was going on with the park. I'll just say a few words. That is, I talked to a few people who were watching the film, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is a park." It's because I thought this is an amazing idea to put together this setting, and they say, "No, it's a real park. This is what it looks like right now." And they took me on their motorbike less than 5 minutes away, and there I was in the park, and it looked exactly like this. It was still being constructed, and this has to do with, again, a very top-down decision of the city government to put this park there. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about it. And then there was this similar situation where, again, this is what in Taiwan is called the Zhuancun. It's different a bit from what's called the Zhuancun in the PRC. It's actually a slum that was put together by Army veterans. This one is a different one, not the one in Da'an. this is, that was demolished for the park. This one is called Baozangyan, and it was also supposed to be demolished. And in fact, what you see here, down here is the remnants of indeed some demolition that did take place. But then the Chengxiangsuo, the Institute for Urban Planning at National Taiwan University, led by people who graduated or taught at UC Berkeley, said, no, we can be activists and we can just change the picture. We can stop it. And the mayor of Taipei was not very happy with what they were doing, but they managed to stop it. And it's a very, in some ways, it's a very, I mean, it's, you can see it's a slum, but you can also see that it's a very picturesque place in many ways. And they said, okay, we can actually rebuild this area. So, or not rebuild, but make it into something that's sustainable as it is. So here's, this is the entire area. It's rather small. But you can see that these art activists came to Treasure Hill about Zhangyan and started talking to residents. Here are some of the residents. Here is a student at National Taiwan University, and here he is with some models explaining what's going on. And they came up with various art activities. So here are some very large pictures that when they're lit during the night, it gives this sense of a ghostly presence. Very apropos to the situation, right, of people who are about to be evacuated. And they put together also a film theater, an open air film theater. This is the screen right here. Just to let you understand what it is, the whole screen is basically a wall with some with a curtain painted on it, right? This is it. The this is the projector. It's basically a small projector connected to a laptop. A professor from National Taiwan University gave his old speakers. That's the speakers. That's the sound system of this film theater. This is it, right? This is the film theater. And
yeah,
here is there is a big light right there. So and you can't turn it off. So this is the very high-tech solution where you take a box and put it right over the light. Right there, you are. That's the lighting system of the film theater. This is what they do at the film theater. They watch. They also have some shaokao, some barbecue, and the whole thing is also being recorded. Right, these people, these young students from National Taiwan University are also clearly interested in documenting what's going on. So, and they put together, for example, this brochure, and you can see how in this brochure they go through the flow chart of what it would take to make this into a sustainable area from the municipality's point of view. So basically, we're again talking about a small area, well, not so small area, about a neighborhood that's slated for demolition. Again, think about the United States. When did you last think about the whole neighborhood, a whole district slated for demolition. You can't do that kind of stuff, right? In Taipei or in Beijing, that makes sense for a number of reasons that have to do with political systems and planning systems and so on. And then what is also interesting is how these systems can then be warped in various directions by the government, by developers, by architects, by artists, and especially in the case that is most interesting for me, filmmakers. So I'm going to show you one more thing, which is perhaps way too hokey. Definitely was too hokey for me to include in the book, but maybe it will explain to you what I'm actually arguing in the book. And again, think of how this could relate to both what I'm talking about in the context of Dragon Whisker Creek and Treasure Hill in Taipei. So here is, and this is Uliangyong rehabilitating the old city of Beijing. This is a very basic chart of how community developers and governments are interrelated. And it's what planners, also urban planners in the United States, would more or less be familiar with. Again, there are some regional differences, but in principle, this is what we're talking about, right? And here are these four, these are the four actors, right? The government, the developers, the community, and the planner is just in the middle. The planner in the middle is just a mediator of sorts, according to this scheme, right? This is what Uliangyong, and as I said, most planners would agree with. However, what I would argue is very important is that these people in the middle, the planners, but also the artists, the filmmakers, and so on, who are in the middle, are not just mediators. They're actually the ones who can cause, as I said, a warp to the system so that everything, here comes my hokey image, right? The people in the middle, and these include planners, but they also include filmmakers and such, make the whole system turn in specific ways. And what I'm interested in is, what is this warp? How does it work? How are they warped? In what directions? By what means? And so on. Sorry, that was a long answer.
And I think that explains a lot of things with the cartoons. That was remarkable. That's a great idea. I think it speaks to not only to what is happening in mainland in Taipei, but also in in many countries as well. Right? The power structure is there. That was universal. It's everywhere on the planet. I think we are going a little bit over time, but I do want to ask a last question. It has been about 10 years since you published the book Painting City Red. So what has changed, and what has not changed in the past 10 years? What is new, in terms of the impact of cinema and maybe new media, right? We talk about new media on city planning and the changing of urban landscape.
So I think a lot has changed. And in fact, a lot has changed. And you saw the last image. It has at least 4 players in it. And each of these players has changed. So urban planning has changed. I actually just read something, actually before I go to urban planning, the government has changed, especially if we talk about the PRC. The Xi Jinping era is definitely palpably different in so many ways, more centralized, more sensitive to various forms of criticism, and it shows also in the material that I'm interested in. And by the way, I have changed. So to some extent, I thought at least that I was going to just say enough is enough and I'm not going to work on this anymore. It didn't quite work out. I'm still very interested in the topic. I'm writing a book about new media and urban space, but in somewhat different ways. But okay, so the government has changed. Developers have changed because the economy in China, I mean, the economic system, not to mention the kind of sums of money that we're talking about, has just changed tremendously. So a lot more is at stake economically. Also, what has already been demolished is demolished, right? So we're moving to another stage in that sense as well. Developers have a different sense of how much they can do. And probably I would talk to you about this in different terms before Jack Ma's mysterious disappearance, and now after, right? So we're talking again about these developers who have to think about what their relationship to power is. And that's changing almost from day to day, right? So I don't even know what's going on there. And then there is the architects, as I was going to say. I just read a few essays the other day written in 2019 that don't look like anything that I would have that I expected to see just a decade earlier. There is more interest in certain aspects of critical academic discourse. For example, I'm very interested in this idea of the palimpsest, the urban palimpsest, things built one on top of the other. I won't go in detail into it, but that discourse has suddenly exploded. Well, still just a few essays, but some essays written in 2019 that I did not expect to see. So a lot is changing in that sense. And where I'm interested in it is what is happening in terms of film and media. And in terms of film specifically, I think a lot of filmmakers have gotten cold feet, especially since around 2011. Not much is being done that is directly critical of urban policy, the way that films just 10 years ago could still do. But it's very interesting to see also what's happening in various other media. So for example, what I'm working on now, more than anything else probably, is miniature models, right? So 微缩模型, right? These models of buildings, but sometimes entire districts or cities, and what they can tell us and how they use the media, which is in some ways very cinematic. There's lighting and there's all kinds of audiovisual spectacle elements to them. And I'm just fascinated with that. So in that sense too, as I said, I've changed. I'm kind of, let's leave cinema in this sense for now aside and see what's going on in adjacent areas.
All right. Patty, are we going to ask new questions or are we going to conclude here?
I think we can stop here, and then the scholars, if they want to stay, we can keep talking. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you for this very engaging and insightful discussion. And our Webster University film series director Pete is here. And each year we collaborate and we screen 6 films in Chinese. Yomi's book is an important guide for me when we choose films. We are looking forward to your book on Zhang Yimou. No pressure, but we look forward to the book. And also, Wang Yu, thank you so much, and good luck with your book manuscript. And look forward to your book too. And
Thank you.
so I would like to thank everyone for joining us. And we posted the next author talk information in the chat box. You are welcome to join us again. And so until then, take care and stay safe. And for our friend who want to stay longer, we have more questions to discuss. And for other participants, please feel free to step out. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I want to throw in Professor Song Weijie's question now. It's a long paragraph, and I'm going to read. So Professor Song was saying that the story. He also wrote on the creek as well in his book, published 2 years ago, and he is asking the story of a Dragon Whisker Creek has been told and retold many times from the perspective of socialist, realist representations, ideological hygienic scenarios, new urban planning, post-Maoist imagination, among many others, over the course of the 60 years. So from Launch's 1951 three-act play to Xian Qun's 1952 movie, and to Li Chengru's 2009 TV drama and other related multimedia adaptations and variations from the 17-year period, sorry, all the way to now, not to now, to the years that you published the book. The the intertextual differences among the Dragon Whisker Creek narratives must be illuminating and illustrating. So for you, Yumi, what would be the major differences among these texts? For example, the striking and huge industrial smokestack in a 1952 film and your critical interpretation.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, and Song Weijie, you're welcome to butt in and explain what specific versions you're thinking about. To some extent, I may not be able to answer also because I am a much lesser literary scholar than Weijie, who can really give us a much better sense of what it all means in literary terms. However, in terms of, since Weijie mentioned the smokestacks, right? I mean, that's I think a real telltale example of how not just Dragon Whisker Creek, but the whole urban environment was conceived. And when we talk about the 1952 film, that smokestack, I mean, I think it's a bit of there's some cheating going on there, because the smokestack is possibly just of a relatively small, some kind of neighborhood crafts thing. It's not a very big smokestack, but it all fits into the frame. It's definitely there, right? I mean, it's not just some kind of CGI setting, right? This is 1952, and it does refer to the idea that the city, any city, will become an industrial hub, right? And Beijing is going to become an industrial hub, and Shanghai is going to become an industrial hub, And to some extent they have, and to some extent, to a large extent, these were failures. Failures in the fact that they were successful. That is, failures in terms of urban planning, because if you take a city such as Shanghai, which relies on the service sector, and make it into an industrial city, which I talked about in chapter 2 of Painting the City Red, you're going to end up ruining much of the city in various ways. Same thing for Beijing. I mean, as anybody who knows the history of Beijing in the last 80 years or so, or 70 years or so knows, we're talking about a city that's under constant pressure that could have been avoided if only, people agreed with the idea of having a so-called Western capital just outside the old city of Beijing, so that the infrastructure would not be as burdened and as stressed as it is. And now they're talking about doing it again. So, so the smokestacks, in 52, it's just a sign of, it's an optimistic sign of development to come. Later on, people realize that, especially, well, industry, coal burning, all of that stuff, not such a great idea, right? So we see that, for example, in films. To go back to the example of Mr. Six, right? So in Mr. Six, the area of old Beijing is mediated through images of a leisure culture and tourism, and Mr. Six's abode becomes a cafe, right? Or there's we're talking basically about the gentrification of the hutong, of the old alleys, not about adding smokestacks to them. I don't know if that answers Weijia's question.
I don't know if Professor Song wants to speak up or. All right. While we are waiting, if he wants to speak up, I will throw in other questions.
He's just unmuted himself.
So.
Hey, Yomi,
please.
it's Weijie. Hey, how are you, Wang Yu?
Hi, Song Laoshi.
Yeah, it's great answer, Yomi. Great. So I think there's a genealogy of the smokestack, not only imagination, but also sentiments. So back to 1952, the film, you mentioned the size of it. So it's not that gigantic, but it is a symbol, a dominant scenario for us to envision even now from the 21st century, the socialist scenario and also urban planning. But later story, like from 1950s all the way to 1970s, this is the moist era, from the 17 years to the 10-year Cultural Revolution. Still, this kind of smokestack. I did the research. I sent you the article. So they're still going on as the dominant image for literature, film, artists and others. So the later on, the coal miner and also the air pollution. There's a new story, a kind of belated awakening of ecological and environmental, crises and concerns. That's a new consciousness, new structural feelings. So I will share my research with you later time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks so much for sharing this.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all who made it to the talk. Yeah, some names I know, some others I don't, and would love to hear more from you. You can always contact me about any common interests.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.